Hi everybody, welcome back to Two Peas in a Kitchen. Today we are going to continue our adventure to getting an active sourdough starter. As you'll remember from episode 1 in this series last week, we started from scratch with a sourdough starter. We're going to talk today about how to know when your sourdough starter is ready to use in a loaf of bread. And remember, we are talking about brand new sourdough starters. So if you are not working with a brand new sourdough starter, you might want to go back and watch episode 1 of this series where we started from absolute scratch making our own sourdough starter. So today we're going to feed our starters in a jar. I'm going to show you again how to do that. And we're going to continue our journey showing you our 4-part test of how you know when your sourdough starter is ready to use to bake a loaf of bread. Stay tuned to the latter part of this video where we're going to show you step by step how you'll know. And this is all part of our journey with you to making beautiful sourdough bread just like this. And in our next part of the series, next week, you're going to be able to learn how to do that. So let's get right to it. So as you know, you're going to need a kitchen scale to do this. These are the 2 jars that we were working with last week that we showed you. And as you recall, what we're doing is twice a day, we are discarding from the jar all of the sourdough starter other than 40 grams. We're only leaving 40 grams in the jar. I've already gone ahead and fed this jar, but we're going to do this one together. This is our first feeding of today. We're doing 2 a day. And I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to discard as much starter as I need to from this jar to reach 40 grams. As you'll recall, we've weighed our jars. These jars are 245 grams, so I'm going to look for a total weight of 285 grams to know that I have 40 grams of starter left in the jar. Okay, so I have 40 grams of our starter here in the jar. I've already gone ahead and weighed the flour and the water that we need for this feeding. So I have 40 grams of flour here, and I'm just going to carefully put this into our jar. Okay, and then I have 40 grams of water, which I've already weighed. I'm going to go ahead and add that right in. And then I'm just going to go ahead and stir that up really good. Make sure every time that you feed your starter, you are scooping up all of the more active starter from the bottom into the jar. And once that is stirred up really well, scrape the bottom there really well. I'm going to go ahead and put the top to the mason jar on. Remember, we're not sealing it really tight. It's still a little bit loose. Otherwise, it will explode when these things really start to get active. We don't want to create a sourdough bomb. And I've gone ahead and I've moved my tape, like we talked about last week, so that the bottom of our tape is right to where the top of our sourdough after the feeding is. And we're going to go ahead and put these in a nice, comfortable spot on the counter. And in the next part of this video, I'm going to talk to you about what we are looking for and what these starters are going to look like as we start to know they are ready to use in a beautiful sourdough loaf just like this one. The first test to ascertain whether your homemade starter is viable and ready to start using in baking is the doubling test. Your starter should be able to double its volume before the next feeding if it is viable.
So the next test that we have when we're trying to determine if our sourdough starter is ready for us to bake with is this. When you turn the jar with your starter in it, you are going to see that the starter just pulls away from the edge of the jar.
The third test to ascertain whether your homemade starter is viable and ready to start using in baking is the bubbling test. Your starter should be bubbling, and these bubbles should be visible from both the outside of the jar and also when you tilt it, you should see them on the top of the starter on the inside of the jar. The fourth test to ascertain whether your homemade starter is viable and ready to start using in baking is the float test. A small spoonful of starter should float at the top of a bit of water.
Okay, now that we have a viable sourdough starter, we're ready to make our first loaf of bread. So make sure you join us next time in our next video where we'll show you exactly how you can make your very first sourdough loaf. And do not forget to subscribe so that you can follow along at home with us on our sourdough journey together. We'll see everybody next time.